Listen, a thick, worn metal cable suddenly snaps under extreme tension. Sparks scatter violently across the cold floor. Look closely at this massive suspended ladle. Inside sits molten steel heated to 1600 degrees Celsius. This is the daily operational reality at the RINL Vizag Steel Plant. When an outdated crane system failed, that ladle dropped. 9 workers died on the floor. Dozens more suffered severe burns. Within hours, the Prime Minister issued a public statement and announced a 2 lakh rupee ex gratia payment to the families of the deceased. You are Nandini Rao, the newly appointed technical director stepping onto this plant floor. The physical disaster has already concluded. You now face a purely administrative crisis. You have exactly 48 hours to finalize the official investigation report. In high-profile industrial accidents, the standard bureaucratic reflex is to find a low-level scapegoat and label the tragedy as human error. That reflex ignores a concept known as competing legitimate interests, where every demand placed on your desk has technical and moral validity. Look at this wide view of the plant floor. This facility has operated at a massive loss for 3 consecutive years. Its survival depends entirely on securing pending global tenders. Behind those financial statements are 40,000 local families, whose direct economic survival is tied to this specific facility remaining operational. The words you write assign responsibility for 9 deaths and dictate the economic fate of 40,000 families. It is a common analytical mistake to assume that a fatal disaster requires a malicious, negligent individual on the ground. Your initial inquiry uncovers a paper trail. The plant's safety officer had repeatedly issued formal warnings about the failing crane mechanism. This flowchart tracks what happened to those warnings. They reached the top but were blocked at this red node. The ministry repeatedly denied the requested budget for upgrades. This highlights the difference between individual negligence and a systemic structural failure. The failure occurred in the allocation process, not on the factory floor. Upgrading the system now requires halting production for 4 months. Doing so will cost the plant its global tenders and force permanent closure. Meanwhile, the labor union has issued a strict demand. Your report must explicitly cite managerial and ministerial failure to guarantee future safety standards. Administrative disasters rarely stem from a single bad actor. They emerge from systemic bottlenecks that force operators into impossible daily compromises. To write a functional report, you must first map the precise incentives of every stakeholder involved. We can plot these incentives on a 2-dimensional matrix, with truth and safety on the y-axis and livelihood and survival on the x-axis. The ministry sits firmly in the low-truth, high-survival quadrant. They want to avoid political backlash and financial accountability for the delayed budget. The union occupies the opposite extreme. They demand maximum transparency and punitive blame to force immediate safety upgrades. The 40,000 dependent families sit entirely on the survival axis. They prioritize economic continuity over a punitive investigation that might close the plant. Look at the expressions on these specific workers. The theoretical matrix intersects with human reality when you meet the son of one of the deceased, who also works here as a contract laborer. He asks you to protect his job. He fears that a harsh, truthful report will bankrupt the plant and leave his remaining family destitute. Delivering maximum punitive justice for the father actively destroys the economic future of the son. His position breaks the assumption that victims always prioritize vengeance over practical survival. Effective administration requires addressing the pragmatic needs of the vulnerable, rather than imposing an abstract ideal of justice upon them. We can clarify this deadlock by analyzing the data through classical ethical frameworks. The utilitarian approach directs an administrator to maximize the greatest good for the greatest number. This balancing scale illustrates the utilitarian math. A massive weight representing 40,000 livelihoods easily tips the scale, justifying a decision to write human error on the report to save the plant and the pending tenders. The opposing framework is deontology, or Kantian ethics, which argues that telling the truth is an unconditional duty, regardless of the fallout. Under deontology, the duty to truth becomes the heaviest weight. You must write ministerial systemic failure, even if it triggers an immediate regional economic collapse. Relying purely on philosophy creates total administrative paralysis. Both directives are logically sound, but entirely incompatible. Adhering strictly to utilitarian compassion compromises the truth, while pure deontological justice causes catastrophic economic damage. The situation requires a hybrid model. You must forge a third path that synthesizes the demand for truth with the requirement for institutional protection. Notice the exact phrasing on this drafted document. The report explicitly rejects the human error cover-up and states the cause as systemic and structural budget allocation deficits. The phrasing is deliberate. It is constructed to mandate procedural reform rather than to hunt individual targets. A human error label leaves the budget process intact, ensuring the mechanical conditions that caused the crash remain in place. Diagnosing a systemic deficit protects innocent local officials from becoming convenient targets, while simultaneously legally forcing the ministry to release the necessary funds. Procedural integrity means correctly diagnosing the underlying disease of a system without needlessly executing the operators forced to work within it. An honest report still carries the risk of spooking investors and triggering the plant's closure. To mitigate this, you utilize an administrative tool known as a parallel recommendation. This split framework outlines the final strategy. On the left, the truth. On the right, compassion, a parallel plan for phased safety upgrades. Included are immediate socioeconomic provisions, guaranteed job security, and a rehabilitation plan for the victims' families. This dual-track approach satisfies the union's demand for safety, offers the ministry a viable path, and secures the workforce's basic survival. The ultimate duty of a public administrator is to step beyond the binary choice of truth versus compassion and architect a sustainable framework that delivers both.